I hope now that our panel is being assembled, panel 5. The title we've got for that is The Healthcare Revolution and Data Revolution. Where do they intersect? I think we'll be discussing about whether or not there actually has been a healthcare revolution, and indeed what that data revolution means to all of us as patients around the world. The healthcare revolution meeting the data revolution, the use of data and advanced analytics is, we know, driving major advances in the field with increasing digitalization of medical records, proliferation of wearable devices, access to unprecedented amounts of patient data, improving diagnosis, treatment, overall patient outcomes. That's the plus side. Let's see if there's a darker side to that as well. Let me introduce panel number 5 then. Joining me on stage from McGill University, Dr. Guy Rouleau, Director of the Neuro Department, the Chair of Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery. Also from Benshi, Liran Belenson, CEO and co-founder. From Urbe, Marcus Felstead, who's the CCO. From Quanta Computers, we have Dr. Ted Chang, who's the CTO. From Whoop, we should have Kirsten Holmes, Vice President of Performance Science and Principal Scientist. And ProPharma, Jason DeGoose, President of ProPharma. All present and correct, that's looking good. Thanks very much indeed. I'll take my seat. And we'll start our introductions. Now, this is a truly eminent and large panel. Welcome, everybody. Thanks very much indeed. As we did with the ones before, let's do a little brief introduction to orient people about yourself, but also about the organization that you represent and what you're all about. So let's start at this end. Ted, if you could start for us, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. My name is Ted Chen. I'm the CTO, GM, and also VP of Quanta Computer. Quanta Computer is actually the biggest computer maker on this planet. So this year's, we actually, our shipment on the laptop is over 50 million laptops. So every 1 out of 3 laptops is made by Quanta, either designed or manufactured by Quanta. But more than that, Quanta also provide smart wearable and also server and also special AI GPU server to power the AI industry. So we partner. Our business model is very much a B2B. So we partner with worldwide top 10 IT brands and also consumer brands for all kind of new innovations. On my role, I oversee corporate technology strategies for global collaborations. We have over 20 years collaborations with MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And we have working from the human-centered computing, cloud computing, and now on AI-enabled medicine and also digital health. My other role is the representative of Taiwan for APEC, APEC. APEC is including all 21 economies around the Asia Pacific Oceans. And so my role is also on the promoting AI and digital health. What we are doing is that we try to integrate our technology efforts on the AI and also on the client devices for the digital health transformation. Thank you.
Okay, great. Ted, thanks very much indeed. Kristen?
Hello, thank you for having me. I work for Whoop, and Whoop is a physiological monitoring device, and we're collecting huge amounts of biometric data and then transforming those data to give you insights about how your body is responding and adapting to stress. We call that recovery. We stage and track your sleep and also give you measures of cardiovascular load, which we call strain. We synthesize all that information and really help you understand from a behavior standpoint behaviors you can take on that will help you improve the trajectory of your health. So think prevention. And I think there's also a case for helping folks manage disease as well. My role at that company, I'm a psychophysiologist. So my research is primarily focused on really understanding the behaviors that move around the metrics that we track, that we say are important to track. So I'm inside all of the democratically available behaviors that impact our sleep and recovery and our ability to take on load.
Great, thanks, Kristen. Jason.
Hi, I'm Jason DeGoes. I'm the president of ProPharma. ProPharma uses technology-enabled services and what we believe is deep scientific domain expertise to help pharma companies, biotech companies, device companies to bring their products to market, starting with services very early on in preclinical development all the way up through commercialization. I've spent most of my career in drug development, both clinical and commercial drug development, and continue to have a passion, have always had a passion for bringing the patient and the voice of the patient and patient insights more wholly into drug development in particular. Thanks.
Thank you. Guy?
I'm a neurologist and a geneticist who spent most of my career doing research in neurogenetics. For the past 10 years, I've been the director of a small neurology neurosurgery hospital and a large neuroscience research institute and a large department of neurology and neurosurgery. I think my role here, comes from the fact that we adopted as an institution open science, and open science really is sharing, and sharing and making information available is very critical for being able to do data science.
Great, thanks very much indeed. And then Liran.
Hi everyone, my name is Liran. I am the CEO and one of the co-founders of BenchSci. At BenchSci, we basically taught a computer how to understand science like a scientist, and we build a biomedical AI platform that's deployed today with the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, and it basically helps them accelerate the entire R&D portfolio. We are over 400 people at BenchSci. We raised over $200 million, and today we work with 16 of the top 20 pharmaceutical companies.
Great, thanks very much indeed. And finally, Marcus.
Hello, my name is Marcus Felsted, acting as the Chief Commercial Officer for the Elbe Group, a family-owned business with around 1,600 employees acting worldwide in the field of bringing energy into the human body for various different applications, either treatment or diagnosis, especially in oncology in the field of GYN, urology, visceral surgery, but also interventional pulmonology and gastroenterology. We have a broad installed base worldwide on a global basis where we do, of course, acquire a lot of data, and we have introduced just a sort of a digitalization run within the company. That's one of the reasons I'm here and excited to hear what's happening.
Splendid. Thanks all for joining us. Now, this is an enormous panel and a very eminent one as well, so I don't want to rush you, and I also can't go through everybody on each question. So let's just see where this debate takes us. I think it's probably fair to start, and Jason, I'm going to start with you for no particular reason, I just decided to. Is the title of this debate correct in your view? Are we in a healthcare revolution? Are we meeting a data revolution? What do those two phrases mean to you?
I think we are. I'm a data user and a technology skeptic, and I think data is it's a tool, and it is what we make of it. Data is not going to solve our problems, whether it's healthcare or climate change or anything else. Data is going to provide us with evidence and hopefully insights from which we can take action. And whether or not we take action is not going to be determined by the data.
Guy, is it Guy or Guy?
Whatever you want.
Whatever I want? Okay, I'll try Guy, but I'll probably say Guy by mistake. So either way, you talked about open science. I wanted you to tell us a bit more about that. But also, one of the phrases I read from one of your introductions when I was looking into this debate was this idea of democratizing information. This idea that all this data is now being harnessed and harnessed for the better good and all the rest of it. That seems to dovetail in with what you said about open science. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. The notion of open science is that academics like me, our role is to generate data, and it's important that we generate data that is findable, usable, interpretable, and that others can use the data. I can give an example. If you ask about data revolution, when I started my career, they sequenced the human genome. It cost $10 billion and took 10 years. Now, I can sequence a human genome for $800 and it takes 1 day. And so that's unbelievably large amounts of data. But that's just in genetics, but there's also in imaging, and there's also in medical data, all kinds of data, the instruments. So the idea is that the open science is absolutely necessary to be able to generate the data that's usable, that can then be used to transform how one does medicine. So open science is very important. Now, it's kind of strange, but when we became an open science institution, we looked around, we were the only one on the planet. So we were the first institution to adopt open science in the world. And the reason being that institutions often want to monetize their discoveries, but when we generate data and we generate knowledge, you can't really easily monetize knowledge and data. That somebody else needs to do that, and that's the different companies and such. So we're the feeders of data.
And of course, Kristen, turning to you then, that's about a big pool of data that's shared amongst the top professionals in their field, taking what they need, drawing conclusions, helping them with their work. What you're in the business of doing is giving that direct to people in the street.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We have this incredible benefit of having huge amounts of data related to an individual's health. And I think where the opportunity lies, I think about this concept of a healthcare revolution. I think there's never been a more exciting time where people can understand their health. And then we can use those data to understand health at scale. And I think the whole, goal of that is to help people understand how to apply their effort. There's nothing more important about taking control of your health than to understand, what do I actually need to do? And that's what this data is helping us understand. What are the behaviors that help drive our sleep quality? What type of medications improve our sleep? What type of medications don't improve our sleep? What does cold therapy do for our ability to get in deeper stages of sleep? What about the timing of our meals? How does that impact our sleep? And I keep going back to sleep because that is the most important behavioral experience we have, as Teresa pointed out.
We discovered that not long ago.
Teresa pointed that out beautifully. But I will say, in order to fix sleep, you have to fix your circadian rhythms first. So there is actually and we are discovering the role of circadian rhythms in our data as well. When people are aligning their circadian rhythms to natural light-dark cycle, we actually see huge impact on resting heart rate and heart rate variability. Again, these biometrics that help us understand one's physiology and the health of their physiology.
And Ted, you know more than most that there's plenty of data. It's the most ubiquitous thing there is in the world today, I guess. Your colleague was telling me that every time I go on Google, I'm probably using one of your systems to find whatever it is I'm looking for. You are everywhere in the room, in everyone's lives. But harnessing that data, purposing that data, that's a completely different challenge, and that's what we're really just starting to do now. Is that fair?
Yes. I think when we talk about the data, especially the big data, of course, right now we understand data is a future field. But you need cloud computing as the combustion engine to convert the data through the machine learning into algorithm or the neural network model for more, digital health applications. So there are many different kind of problems that we need to solve. And so working with Google for to leverage their public cloud is one thing, but different areas have different policies and privacies around the data governance. So sometimes people will need them to put the servers on site to manage their own data for their own purpose, to manage their own data lake in some sense. So actually, this is very important, but it's also very complicated, which means that in the future, not all the data will go to the public cloud. There will be special needs to them, put data, small amount of data, still big, in that the centralized servers located in different areas to support local the digital health need. Yeah.
Liran, am I fair in saying that Benchy is right at the sharp end of this kind of a lot of this kind of work?
Yeah, it's bench sci, so I just want to correct you, but it's okay. Yeah, so bench and scientist, bench sci. No worries. At least you didn't get my name wrong, which is what most people get wrong, so I appreciate that.
One up, one down.
No, for sure. For me, where we are is upstream. On day one, when scientists are working in the preclinical organizations and big pharma and biotechs, forming hypotheses and developing drugs. And there's a lot of data there, but I think one of the problems with data is that there's a lot of it and can actually create a lot of noise and a lot of problems. And I think where people should actually start is not which data we have, but which problem are we trying to solve, and then which data do we need to solve that problem. And there's another translation there, like Guy said, which is there's this data, but how do you actually get users, scientists, doctors, and so on to use that in a way that's democratized, where you don't need to have a bioinformatician or data scientist to be able to answer questions for them and extract all the data, but actually productize that, and that's as big of a challenge.
Marcus, where does Airbe stand on all this? You talk about access, you know, in your literature. Presumably that plays an important role then in that respect.
Well, if we talk of data revolution, for me, that has a lot of stages. And I think especially sort of mid-sized companies are probably still at the stage where they are discussing how do I retrieve data. And then we have companies specializing in analyzing, using artificial intelligence to make something out of the data. We, as Airbe, are in a stage where we are very heavily debating value creation with data. So for us, it is very important that, yes, we do see that we have the data. That's number one. And we have technical feasibilities to retrieve the data. We solved that issue, which was difficult enough. And now the next stage for us within this data revolution is how do we now create the right value to approach the hospitals or the staff in the hospitals, which is biomeds, which is of course a physician, which is the different stakeholders within our range of customers we do have, because we're not addressing the patient directly as a company selling into hospitals. So for us at the moment, we are at the stage of how does the real value look like? And for us, this is essential because we believe that there's so much data which you could make available, and you probably with a little bit, we would call it marketing, you could make it interesting, but is it real value? And that is what we are trying. That's why we are very careful within our initiative of getting that data out, and we are still at the stage of creating that value where we are now finding it, which is all in the way of how surgery is performed in a more safer, putting patient safety at first, and then also time, which is a big issue in hospitals today. Staff is not there. Lack of staff worldwide is a problem within the healthcare system. So we're trying sort of to bring actually what we see today. I always call it, if you drive a modern car and it rains, your windscreen wipers goes on automatically. You're not actually switching it on. It works because there are sensors inside, which is nothing else but digitalization. In an OR where you save lives, you don't have that sensors. It's incredible. I mean, an OR is working without sensors. So you've got a camera in the human body, laparoscopically, and there's smoke created. If you bring energy into the body, there's heat, there's smoke, and suddenly you don't see anything anymore. So a surgeon has to give somebody the order, a command to switch something on that he can see something again, which means a smoke evacuation unit.
Yeah.
It would be very simple in putting that together, like saying, you know what, if the camera detects smoke, that unit goes on automatically. Not available today in a modern OR. And that's incredible. And that's what we are working on.
How is that a data issue?
Excuse me?
It's a stupid question of the afternoon for me, but how is that a data issue?
Because everything we take, we see, a camera sees, we turn the data into a sensor functioning part. And that data then creates value. So that's, again, something very interesting. What is data and what do you do with the data? So there are so many ways from a medical manufacturing side of point of view, where we first focus on the product, then on the outcome of patients. And before we do that, we first try to bring the data into a new technology or new product innovation. And that then, with that later, again, data creation, we are then able to turn that into patient safety.
I mean, Liran, that must resonate with the work that you do quite a lot as well, I'd have thought. But also, how much data is there? I mean, even in the medical field, if we've got a box this big of all the data to do that's pertinent to the medical field, how much of it is useful, how much of it is useless? You know?
That's probably too much.
Yeah.
But again, it goes back to the question, useful for what? What are you trying to solve? Because if you take everything and put it together, specifically in science, if we take ChatGPT for example, it read everything on the internet. It speaks with very strong conviction, but it makes up a lot of things because all this mountain of information actually becomes noise. If you look at medicine, if you look at science, you're specialized in a very specific field, right? And there's very specific data that you need for that field. The same thing you have to do when you train a computer and a machine. So for us, when we use, for example, large language models, it's not that we have one model that does everything. We look at it as an ecosystem because we're trying to mimic a scientist's mind, but there's so many different scientists in so many different fields. So it goes back to what's the problem you're trying to solve, what's the data that you need. And actually more data can actually create more noise and actually cause more issues.
He's right, isn't he, Ted?
Absolutely. I think some of the things I would like to add is that even for one single sensors of different, from different manufacturers, they will cause, differentiations among the data you collected. So you have to normalize the data and minimize the noise so that you can use your, the fantastic, models for training and for AI machine learning. So that's another, the labors that you need to do. Yeah.
And so that exists at a software level, but it also exists at a medical level, doesn't it, Guy? In that you've got to decide what it is you want to record, what it is you want to share, what's pertinent to your colleagues and others around you.
Yeah, that's an especially big problem because you have so many different technologies that measure the same thing, and you end up with a lot of data, but you need to develop the interoperability to be able to put the data together. So an example is, that I like to give is a huge study looking at multiple sclerosis where one of the major endpoints is MRI imaging. But there are dozens, if not hundreds, of different MRI machines, and each machine uses a different method to acquire the data. So how do you put together data from maybe 500 different techniques for 10,000 patients? So that's the interoperability. It takes a lot of expertise, but it is one of the challenges of the data is that data comes in, it's not all interoperable. It's not all in the same format. It's very hard to put some of this together. It's not impossible, but interoperability is one of the major obstacles and objectives.
And that's just in controlled scientific studies.
Yeah.
Now you go to the real world,
Yeah.
where there's exponentially more data, and you need not only to be able to sift through and get to the right data in order to generate insights, but you need trust and permission because people don't trust that we'll do the right things with data. We just, I'll say marked rather than celebrated the 5th year anniversary of GDPR. And I had a conversation at lunch about data privacy and can we actually use all of the data available to us for the betterment of people. It does require trust.
Trust is a huge issue, isn't it, Guy?
Yeah, I think this is one of the other points I wanted to make is that data comes from humans, at least not all of it, but a lot of it comes from humans, and there are privacy issues and such. So how does one overcome some of this? Is kind of one of the problems we have to deal. How do you overcome it? And I think that the way to overcome it is to involve patients. And if you involve patients, they understand that this is for the good of maybe not them, but of their children or of others, and there's a lot of altruism. So we found that getting patients involved really facilitates the ability to overcome the issues of confidentiality, of permission, and such. So that's something that we work a lot on as part of the open science, which involves a lot of the patients.
It's how they can contribute to the answer. I agree.
And that interaction there, Kristen, for example, with the people that use your products, I imagine, and I'm probably wrong, but I imagine it's kind of, heart rate, how long I slept, pretty basic stuff that we think, okay, that's... So are you not affected by the concerns that the other members of the panel are talking about, or are these issues relevant to your product as well? Because it's a much more bordered space, isn't it?
We're absolutely concerned about privacy. But in our terms and conditions, we do let our members know that, hey, we will do research on these data. Yeah. And I think, just to the comment in terms of people being altruistic. I think there is this notion of being a citizen scientist and contributing to science and really trying to understand, and in our case, really understand the human body and be able to then deliver those insights to and democratize those insights. So I think there is a lot of altruism, certainly in our member population, that enables us to do really to look at population trends and then take those insights and say, okay, well, what if we see, can we replicate this in a more controlled, scientifically rigorous study? And I think that allows us to say something really meaningful about some of these behaviors that might be impacting the trajectory of your health, and then being able to find the signal. I think COVID was a really good example. We have hundreds of thousands of folks on our platform, and when COVID descended on us, we started looking at the data, and we were actually the first company to really discover that respiratory rate. We know that obviously respiratory rate is at the core of COVID, but we saw in our data that signal very clear. Of all the other metrics that we tracked, respiratory rate was the one that surfaced as being the most predictive of COVID, and we were able to develop, you talk about speed, within 3 months we were sent to peer review, and we built an algorithm that basically enabled us to detect COVID 80% of the time accurately 3 days prior to symptom onset. And so the entire PGA Tour, got on board and got all of their staff, all of their athletes, on Whoop. And, before, we have a great story with Nick Watney, a professional golfer who had a test on a Tuesday, a COVID test. He was negative, woke up Thursday morning. His Whoop said that his respiratory rate was through the roof. He self-isolated, and indeed, he was COVID positive. So it was just like a really, I think, cool moment for us as a company where, these data are really doing good. And being able to have access to those data and do, experiments and research, I think really can move,
The bit I'm wrestling with is, so let me use an example outside the medical field. I met someone who's consolidating data for supply chains, and what he was doing, looking at regularity of weather. So he's getting data from the meteorological service, of tides and shipping, getting information from maritime services, of how docks and so on and ports around the world operate, getting the timetabling from those sorts of things. And through that was able to make a much clearer algorithm for his clients about how quickly they could move their stuff around the world, purposely grabbing the data from other places, assembling it to make a brand new story. So as I understand it, outside the health sector, you can go hunting for elements that will build a picture for you, but presumably also you can hunt for elements, and by accident, there's a surprise waiting for you as well. I mean, do you find that, Jason, in your consultancy business, that the data can be a surprise as well as something that you skillfully hunt down, as it were?
One of the things that we tell our clients is that the answer is unquestionably in there, but the answer may be no, right? Yeah. So it's not necessarily what you're looking for, and we very often will deliver results, whether it's from a clinical trial, whether it's from data coming into a call center that doesn't necessarily tell them what they want. It does provide an answer to the question, it's just not what they're looking for.
How do we clean that up, Laren? How do we make it work as economically as we can?
So from my experience, and it also, again, it depends what you're trying to do with it. I think you can use regular code, machine learning, and so on. It depends how complex the space is. From my experience in this space of science, it takes you 80% of the way, and the extra 20% you have to do with humans and clean everything up. Especially in the space of bioinformatics, for example. Like, science is complicated, but it was also made overly complicated by people of just how they name things and share things and so on. And there's just stuff that you can't teach a computer yet how to do, and it's great if it does 80% of the work, but the extra 20% of the work is really messy, and you grind it out until you get the data cleaned.
We talked earlier this morning about inflection points. I mean, where are we at with the potential inflection point in this field? I mean, are we just starting out on the data trail, or are we halfway down it? I mean, outside again, I'm not totally clear. Marcus, I mean, could you? Where are we?
I would clearly say we're just starting out. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. Again, if you data makes the bigger sort of we always come from a patient perspective. If you run a clinical study, you look at the patient cohort. So in data, it's nothing else. You have to get as much as you can, and then depending on what you are looking for, do that on a global basis from different countries, because there are always different aspects. Now, if you do that, then you're certainly confronted also with a very different data security law, regulations from each country to the other, which makes it very hard, again, to look for the same data you're getting from the one country where you say, oh, that would be interesting to sort of correlate that with the data we would receive from India or from Germany. And then suddenly we see that, well, in India we get them, in Germany, no, sorry, the contractual negotiations with hospital would be so difficult to retrieve that data that we then say, okay, we leave these countries out and we use the other countries. So that is something which is still, which tells me that we are still at the very beginning, because that has to change while we evolve, and we simply have to all come to the conclusion that data is very valuable and we should use it as an asset. And therefore, we somehow have to find ways in making it available.
Yeah.
Okay, Mad. I think there's another aspect. I think the technology works and the invention is there, but then you have to commercialize it, which is a completely new layer for this. And you have to, it's the same thing as you build trust with consumers, you have to build trust with customers. And yes, it does work. And I don't think things solve everything at once and to start. So you start with something small, you build trust, you solve that, and you move on. When you're selling to big organizations, hospital, pharma, governments, it can take years. And also require massive investments of money because it takes years. And then even on top of that, there's the time that it takes. And another layer is this is all new. Like data, AI, it's new. There's no existing budgets for this. You're not building a Me Too product or, hey, move this system of record to this system of record. So you have to clear new budgets. So you have to be able to tell a really good ROI story and capture it and communicate it. That's a massive layer of complexity that just in addition to inventing something.
One thing I wanted to get onto is the issue of who owns the data. Isn't it my data? If it's my bones you took photographs of, isn't it my data? But also the custodianship of the data. Private, enterprise, government space, AI silos, data banks, who owns it? I mean, Ted, that's something we're still only at the beginking of sorting out.
Yeah, before these questions, I would like to add some more points on the data. I think currently we all talking about collaboration and also the consolidation of original data. Put it together and we try to build a much super AI on the large the data set you have. Another thing that people are thinking about that you can also do transfer learning, which means that you can collaborate over the AI models that you created. Or you can do federated learning, which means that AI model itself is one kind of data to collaborate with. In reply to your questions, basically, this kind of AI is contributed by many people who are willing to share their data to come up with the model for healthcare purpose. And then there is no, privacy or identity inside the inferencing model. It only links with the original data, link with the EMR. It's different models. So that's what I mean is that when we talk about the data, there are many different kind of level of data to be used in the order to create the value for the future. Yeah, that is also very important to consider the future collaboration models over the data we are thinking about. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the nuts and bolts of harnessing this data then? To go back a step a bit, how do you go after? You understand that there's various surveys done. Do you go to a library and say, oh, here's some information about spinal operations done between 1976 and 1978? How do we catalog? How do organizations go after the information? We know where you go for your information. You go to your clients. As soon as they put on the gear, they're in a contract with you. But Jason, if you're tasked to look into a certain issue, how do you start?
So there are libraries in a way, right? There are data banks, data repositories, and depending on what you're specifically looking for, there is a place to go to try and retrieve it and gain access to it. And then can you compile it with other data sets? And as long as it's de-identified and aggregated, then to go back to your question, who owns it? Yeah, I could answer it depends on where you live, but in general, once it's deaggregated and de-identified, you can use it without the concern that Andrew is going to call and say, I want my data pulled out of, that site.
And Guy, when you first started engaging with open science, as you say, you were a pioneer in that field. I mean, the data has been collected all over, but you created that relationship, if you like, between your work and the data. When you started, did you think we'd be where we are now, or have we sort of gone left at a crossroads?
Yeah, if I knew the road I'd have to take, I probably wouldn't have embarked.
Yeah.
In fact, the complexity of the origins of the data and the kinds of the data and the ability to put the data together is Byzantine. I mean, there are some communities that I deal with, like for example, brain imaging, where they have been sharing data for a long time and they've worked out a lot of the methods. But in other fields, like in molecular biology, in microscopy, in all these kinds of data, there are no tools, and there's no standardization, and that is a big job, being able to organize data so that it can be usable. I think the usable is the key term. I mean, if you have structured data, which is what is done with the instruments, that works. But if you have unstructured data and you have data from all kinds of different systems, like the EMRs, the electronic medical records, it is very, very challenging to be able to put things together. And then if you go across countries where there are different words that are used to mean the same thing, it becomes very complicated. So I think that a lot of work needs to be done to be able to standardize as much as possible data, to be able to have the large amounts of data that are needed. So in the medical field, from hospitals and such, I think we're maybe at the beginning of the beginning of being able to do this.
And the collection of the data. I mean, again, we know how you guys collect your data, because the people collecting it are doing it intentionally. But, plenty of people have horror stories about insurance companies going through your doctor's notes from 20 years ago and saying you're unacceptable for insurance because he had a chat with you about your alcohol intake, which was probably an innocent conversation at some point, but the doctor recorded it without thinking about it in his notes. I mean, the collection of the data is important. The integrity can be spoiled, presumably. Okay, we're coming to the end of it. I think the best thing I'd like to do, if possible, is just a little projection from each of you now about where you see us going, the direction of travel, where we're heading for, perhaps where your particular industry or your particular speciality is going, but a little bit of a prediction of where we're heading at the moment, given what we've talked about now and how quickly we've traveled from where we were 20 years ago. Marcus, if I could start with you, what do you think the direction of travel is at the moment?
I mean, again, coming from a medical device manufacturer perspective, we definitely believe that data being populated and analyzed in the right way will bring surgery in the OR a little bit what we see today in aviation, in a civil fixed-wing aircraft in the cockpit. You have a lot of things which helps you to do your job better. And that is exactly where we, from again, medical device manufacturing side point of view, will see data making a tremendous step in to that field in hospitals, because that's really lacking today. We are not using data to predict things within a surgery. It's starting now, coming from the imaging point of view, where imaging and artificial intelligence is analyzing a picture and then having a very good sensitivity on telling if that is a lesion which should be treated or not. So that's where it starts from an imaging point of view, but there are so many more fields where that will have an impact and that will change the environment in an OR.
Okay, Liran?
I'll try and keep it brief. I think there's going to be a lot of interest, a lot of activity. I think a lot of it won't translate and won't work, either because the technology don't work or because people don't want to adopt it. Because does a doctor really want an AI doctor beside them telling them what to do? Because that can limit their jobs. And some jobs theoretically could have already been eliminated because models can do that better, but there's a reason it doesn't. And at the end of this, I'm assuming some will make an impact, and hopefully that will increase the productivity that we have as a society and cause some good.
Okay, great. Guy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that we're going to overcome all these difficulties. It's going to take a while. And I think this is going to improve diagnosis, the quality of diagnosis. It's going to help patients. And I think overall it's a good thing. The other thing is that often the things that we think make sense are wrong. And I think using data will be able to help determine whether or not, you know, what we thought would be the right thing is the right thing.
Jason.
I think we're very far along in our ability to collect data. We're a little bit down the path on how to use data, and we haven't even left the starting gate on how to standardize and regulate data.
Yeah, well, okay, Kristen, yeah.
Yeah, totally agree with that. I would say predictive analytics. I think that where I see the future, and it's so exciting, is being able to look at behaviors and be able to say, you know, with certain, be able to model those behaviors and understand how those behaviors are going to impact the trajectory of your health. So, you know, in looking at some of these things that we can really measure, like decreased REM onset latency as a risk for, as a precursor to depression, we can look at, you know, how the night-to-night variability and how that is going to impact metabolic outcomes. I mean, there's so many things that we can quantify and build models around that will help individuals understand the trajectory of their health. So most importantly, they can change course before it's too late.
Okay, great. Kristen, thanks. Ted, final thought.
Yeah, I have to make it very quick. Yeah, I think.
Don't be bullied by that.
18 seconds, go.
So basically, you know, from ICT point of view, we see many evidence being created rapidly in adapting, you know, the new technology, especially information technology, for the digital health transformations. So technically, we are very optimistic that, you know, our visions for the future medicine, like precision medicine, preventative medicine, and also predictive medicine, or personalized medicine will be happen in a very, very short time. Especially, you can already see the rapid growth of, you know, success of AI models like ChatGPT and others.
Yeah.
So more and more, you know, the efforts from ICT sides will put in these, you know, sectors. Once there are more and more evidence, the public sectors will learn from it, and then how to, you know, collaborate with the private sectors, and how to regulate the data, and also how to, you know, the provision more the value out of the data we created.
Great. Well, to draw something from one of your briefing notes, I can't remember which one it was, we need to draw order from the potential chaos of that. Great stuff. I'll save us time by not mentioning you all by name this time around. Panel 6, what a wonderful panel, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much indeed. Panel 5.